Okay, so video number 2, I worked on carving, so my little pieces have been sitting out for about an hour now. That's about the longest you want to leave these pieces here uncovered, otherwise they'll get really dry. So while they were sitting out, I was carving and reshaping my smaller pinch pot. So if you look closely, it's got all kinds of texture on it, and I actually gave it a nice new really round shape, and I'm going to show you how I did that using my carving tools. So this one I haven't really touched yet. It has a pretty square shaped bottom, and I'm going to actually round that out as well. So these tools are great for carving away excess clay. So you want to feel your walls first to get an idea of about how thick this clay is, because you don't want to carve off way more than what you have. And this is pretty sturdy now. I could definitely still bend it a little bit, but it's dried out a good amount. But it's still wet enough that I can carve away and change the shape of the outside of this pot. So that's one of the reasons it's good to leave your pinch pot a little thicker. You don't want to make those walls super thin when you first pinch it out, because it gives you the opportunity to be able to carve this. Now, when you're carving, you might not be able to get a perfectly round, flat surface. You can use the back of a spoon or anything flat, even maybe the wooden rib, and you can kind of rub that on there if you want to flatten out or smooth out a surface. That's called burnishing. So you can do that if you're looking for a really smooth texture on the outside of your pot. But I'm not really going for a really smooth texture. As you can see, I'm going for more of a really kind of ripped up, bumpy looking texture. So yeah, this is gonna produce a lot of excess clay. It's just gonna be falling off of this pot as I'm going around and changing the shape. This is also a good opportunity to kind of recarve the lip of your pot if you had some unevenness that you wanted to try to fix. And then you can still take your finger and smooth out those edges to make it nice and smooth. Maybe you want to put some kind of texture on the inside of your pot. You can carve that in there. So before you really start carving, you should kind of have a plan about what it is that you're trying to do. Do you want to have like some kind of pattern inside? Do you just want to recarve the shape of it? That's really up to you. So as you're working, you can just push all those carving shavings off to the edge, and we'll clean all of that up at the end of class. Moving that one off to the side, I spent a good 20 or 30 minutes carving into this pot, getting the shape I liked. I would spend a little more time on it, but I want to go ahead and show you how I'm going to attach or applique clay onto my pots. So I did carve those little feet, the ones that you saw me cut in the last video, because I wanted them to be a little skinnier on the bottom than on the top. So the way I did that was I just took this tool and I just went ahead and rotated this around in a circle as I carved away. And then since this is a foot that my pot's gonna stand on, I made sure to tap that bottom nice and flat. Also, if you look at the bottom of my pot, you might be able to see I used my needle tools to mark off where I'm gonna attach those 3 feet. So this is the center of the bottom of my pot, and I wanna evenly space those 3 feet so that the pot will stand nice and sturdy. So when you ever want to attach one piece of clay to another, it's best to wait until both pieces of clay have dried a little bit, or are what we would call leather hard. You don't really want to attach really, really wet clay to really, really wet clay. It can get very sloppy. Unless you're coil building, you can do it that way. Which is why I said we wanted to let these pieces sit out for a little bit before we started attaching. So when I'm ready to attach something, I have to do something called score. So scoring is actually just tearing up the clay. So you're gonna tear up the clay in both directions like that. And you wanna do the same thing to the thing that you're attaching. So I'm gonna score the part that I'm going to attach it to. And then we wanna create something called slip. Slip is just wet clay. So I'm actually just taking some water and dropping it right onto there. Slip can also be a little bowl of really, really moist clay that you can use, but for today we're just gonna go ahead and add some water and then score it again. Be careful not to puncture all the way through your pot when you're doing this. So as you can see, it's starting to wet that clay again, and it's getting kind of sloppy. That's good, that's what we want. And then I'm ready to attach these together. So what I wanna do is I wanna go ahead and press them together, and I want my foot to angle out a little bit. And I'm just gonna kind of wiggle this into place, and those little scores that I made are going to attach. And that's exactly what I want to happen. I want them to attach to one another, and then I can use my wooden knife to kind of go around and blend that seam. If you've got excess slip coming out, just wipe it off onto your table. And blending that seam. Just so. Now I'm gonna go ahead and attach my other 2 feet so I can stand this up and make sure that it stands nice and evenly without wobbling around, because I don't want a wobbly pot. So you guys can watch as I finish this up. I'm gonna score both of these areas. This is where my other 2 feet or legs are gonna go onto my little tiny bowl. I'm gonna score my legs, put some water on there to create some slip. Score it again until it starts getting kind of messy. Don't worry about being too gentle. You don't want to break it, but you also really want to get those scores in there. Wiggle it into place. I'm gonna go ahead and kind of see how this is standing so far. So far, so good. I'm gonna go ahead and score my last one. The needle tool works best when you're scoring something really small. If you're working on something larger, you can use the fork. But for something this tiny, you guys will really have to share your needle tool at your tables. I have some really long push pins that I can pass out, and you can use those for scoring as well. And then I'm gonna wiggle that into place. And gently, I'm going to set this down. I don't want it to break. And that looks pretty good. It's standing up pretty nicely. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and clean up those seams. Now, one thing with pottery is you're not done until you've really cleaned up the pot as nicely as you want. Now, I can show this very close to you. There's a lot of little messy areas on the bottom of this pot. I could spend a good 30, 40 minutes, maybe even an hour, just working on getting this as neat and as clean as I can. And that really just comes down to what your style of craftsmanship is. You know, there's a difference between leaving something sloppy and intentionally having